you go.
Can't be all crip.
Hey, there you go.
Oh,
I guess I'll sit here so I can advance this. You know, I think for Christmas I'm going to buy the city one of those cars so that I don't have to do this.
yeah, I know we're gonna start.
Of course it is. It got broken at that last meeting. Riot ensued. They threw a brick at it.
All right, you guys ready, Claire?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to get the meeting started. This is a meeting of the Committee of the Department of Public Works. My name is Councilor Green. I'm joined by Councilor Driscoll, Councilor Carney, Councilor Rudd, Councilor Thompson. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss potential improvements to our process for doing road reconstruction in the city of Syracuse. So Corey, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Counselor, and thank you for the opportunity to share this information. I'm Corey Driscoll Dunham. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the City of Syracuse. Jeremy Robinson, our D.P.W. Commissioner, is there, along with our Superintendent of Street Repair, Kevin Hunter. Dale?
You can take the other one, Corey.
Can you want to do that?
Yeah.
Steve.
You guys should have your own mics.
Neil Burke, Transportation Planner with the Department of Public Works.
So thank you again for the opportunity. I'm just going to start with a really quick overview of our road reconstruction and how it operates. So road reconstruction falls under the Division of Street Repair and the Department of Public Works. There are about 50 employees within the division. They're responsible for the maintenance and repair of all city streets, curbs, and sidewalks. They oversee the in-house milling of streets for repaving and also slurry seal application. They also oversee the asphalt production at our city plant. In terms of historically, at least in recent history, the decision-making process for road reconstruction, the condition assessment was really done in-house at D.P.W. By a particular staff member who from my understanding, didn't necessarily have the tools or the bandwidth to really be able to consistently assess the roads, and so we didn't really have consistent year-over-year ratings, at least from the information that I've seen for the last few years. And that presented a challenge in making sure that the decisions that we made on where to spend money for road reconstruction was driven by data and reflected where the greatest need was. So Kevin Hunter has been, given the perhaps unfortunate task of having most of that live in his head, where it's a combination of projects that he knows other agencies might be working on that we could maybe benefit from coordinating, the condition of the roads, a combination of, concerns and complaints that we get from residents, from counselors, from members of the community. And so all of that lives in Kevin's head, and he works with as many folks as he can to try and make sure that we're spending the money the best way we can. But I really think that we could make the process a lot easier for Kevin and for everybody by having it be a more data-driven process. Historically, the decision-making process has minimal public input. Oftentimes, members of the public, residents, wouldn't know that streets were going to be constructed or even considered to be constructed until it came before the council, or sometimes when we showed up on their street. And I think inadvertently it lacked transparency. I don't think the intent was to keep it secretive, but that's just the way that it tended to operate. And just as a reminder, last year the council approved $4 million for road reconstruction in our last budget. So enter SMTC. So as the council knows, we've worked with SMTC on a number of projects. The one that I most recently that we were before the council was the sidewalk snow removal. They've been really great in providing us the information and data that we need to prioritize pedestrian safety, and I think that really lent a lot of credibility and legitimacy to how the streets were selected, that this really reflected the greatest threat to pedestrian safety. It wasn't driven by politics or who complained the loudest or even necessarily where the most pedestrians were. It was where it was the most hazardous for people to be walking in the street. So every year, right, I believe it's every year, SMTC publishes the Bridges and Pavement Condition Management System Report, which is a comprehensive clearinghouse for pavement data for federal aid eligible roads within the planning area. So throughout the pavement report, member agencies can track investments on federal aid eligible roads across the system. So that's generally how the report has worked. But in conversations with SMTC, they had, they made the offer to expand that assessment to all of the streets in the city, our entire road system. So they used the New York State DOT surface score rating scale so that there was a consistent standard set across the city. This is a snapshot in time, so it's not something that's continually evolving. It would be a once a year annual snapshot in time of what the condition of our road system is. The determinations were made block by block. SMTC also used a camera to capture images. I think there are about 15,000 images that were captured as part of the process. A big shout out to SMTC in the back there. Thank you for all of your help. And I think one of the biggest headlines is that this was provided at no cost to the city. There are firms out there that will offer to offer the service at a cost to the city. This was provided at no cost, and it adds a tremendous value. So just really quickly, I wanted to go through how the surface score works to give you some idea of how roads are rated. I'm obviously not the expert, but I will try to give my layperson's opinion, and not opinion, but my summary of how this works. So it's a windshield survey. It's based on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best. So 10 is excellent. On our map, they generally are the ratings of 10 and 9, so there's no or slight pavement distress. They're usually recently constructed or rehabilitated streets. On the 10s, there's new pavement. It's very dark and neat. On 9, almost all the pavement is free of distress. The surface is typically oxidized to a gray color, but there really aren't a lot of cracks or any damage to the street. So that's a 9 or 10. Mike Barney. Okay.
On the 1,500 images, is the rule of thumb like the one per block? Do they go to the intersections? And
I think it was every 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds.
It's not a timer. Can you come up to the mic?
Yeah.
Sorry, we have
You're on camera.
record process here.
James D'Agostino, director of SMTC. It was on a timer. There's a camera and a GPS unit and an iPad and someone driving and someone rating. We had 2 teams. They drove around the city over the summertime. The person who did it, Andrew Frazier, is here if you want to ask him specific questions about what he did. And it was set to take images at a set time interval. So what we did is what's going to be posted online is a picture that was in the approximate center of the segment as you were traversing the segment. So there's multiple pictures per segment, but the online map will only just have one that's in the approximate center.
The next rating down is good, which is generally a 7 or 8. There's minor or moderate distress, which is infrequent or occasion. Most of the pavement's free from cracking. There's not secondary cracking. The surface is fairly uniform and neat. The surface score just, and I won't obviously get into this level of detail, but it also outlines the specifics regarding the width of a crack, or whether it's connected to other cracks, or the width between the cracks. So I mean, it's a pretty detailed standard that's used. This is a fair, so there's some distress occasionally or infrequently, occasionally too frequently. So in this, you're seeing more and more of the pavement is cracked. This is poor, severe, very severe distress, which is occurring frequently. So there's a 5 on the left and a 4 on the right. There's multiple well-developed cracks. And then this is poor, so rating from 1 to 5 reflects poor, so there's severe or very severe distress. Yeah, the one on the right is not a photo of Syracuse. We don't have any roads like that. The lowest that we had, I think, was a 3 across the city, so we don't have any 1s or 2s. So this is a photo from NISDOT's manual that I took, but it's not a photo of here. So the one on the left is a 3, and the one on the right is a 2. So our findings. So, as you can see, about 50% of our roads fall into the excellent or good category. 25% fair, 22% poor.
12%. Oh, excellent or good.
Yes, excellent or good. And so our average weighted rating was about a 6.6 across the city, so we're in kind of the fair range. As James just mentioned, SMTC is in the process of creating a public online mapping application which will display these pavement scores with photos so that people can look on a website and look through, what roads are rated throughout the city and photos to attach them. And I think it'll provide the public with access and insight into how our road reconstruction decisions are made. This really is helpful in a number of ways, but it establishes a baseline by which we can measure progress. So next year, we'll have a new rating and we'll be able to see, did we move the needle? Do we have more good roads than we had before? Is it moving in the wrong direction and we have more poor roads? And it'll help ensure that this is a data-driven selection process for road reconstruction, that funding is going to where the greatest need is.
So can I ask questions?
Yeah.
Does a fair potentially have potholes?
Yes, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's an excellent.
No, an excellent would not have potholes.
So excellent and good would be more pothole free, but fair.
Yes.
Potholes.
Okay. A couple things. The first
Okay.
was you're looking at the map that you guys sent out.
Yes.
Through us, the color coordinated stuff, and then you just looking at the summary. Honestly, gut reaction looking at it, saying, "Oh, over 50% of our roads are excellent or good." In all honesty, I sat there and thought, well, "What the heck are we? How is this possible?" 'Cause
We anticipated that kind of reaction.
when you actually go and look at the map, and at least looking at my district, looking at what I believed was some of the worst ones and things like that, you do notice, okay, Sedgwick, Farmer, Park Street, that's been on the list for 2 years now. They're in poor condition, and they are.
Yes.
They qualify and fall under that. But you go look at other streets that you say, geez, is it really, what's excellent, what's good, and you can see, okay, geez, I guess that would, constitute that. So
Sure.
I was pleasantly surprised by it, but Park Street, Sedgwick, Farmer, Brattle, all those big chunks of red in my district.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Especially Park, that's been on the, list for 2 years now.
so there is no really easy way to convey this.
You guys get that? You mentioned it.
Was it a neighborhood watch meeting last night? Park Street.
To share this map, I mean, to include it in the PowerPoint, it was going to be too small for anybody to see. I printed out some copies. There are some additional copies there in case anybody in the audience wants to see them. I also have a poster board size printout of the map there, and then also it is available online on the city website that you'll be able to see the road ratings. So I know this isn't the ideal format, but aside from looking at it online, there's no real easy way to look at this. It's a lot of information.
Do you have a sense of what the ideal breakdown would be, since you obviously want to use the useful life of a road? So, like, you would want, maybe you avoid them going to poor, but you would have, like, fair. Is there an ideal breakdown of where you see us wanting to be?
So ideally everything would be good and fair, but
Good and excellent. That's
Good and
ideal. Let's
excellent.
But I mean,
shoot
you
higher
would
than
want
that.
to use the life of the road, right? You don't
Right.
want you can't afford
Right.
and this is just a snapshot. So we want to see year over year, where is the investment making the biggest amount of difference? So is it getting all roads to excellent, or is it preventing roads from falling into poor and making sure that we are bumping them up to fair from
but
mediocre?
you don't yet have an opinion on that.
No, we have compared ourselves to the county and New York State DOT, and we are in line with what their pavement ratings look like. Our percentages are fairly consistent across the board countywide, and then also the state's a little better because they have things like the throughway and a little bit less real estate to deal with. But we're not an outlier by any means. But moving forward, this is just step one.
And I think that's, SMTC has offered to work with us in a similar way that we prioritized for sidewalk snow removal. Where does it make the most sense for us to start? As Neil said, is it bringing the poor roads into good, or is it, trying to, or bring the fair roads into good, or is it trying to pave all the poor roads? I mean, where's the best value?
This is probably a longer term SMTC comment, but would there be a way to take this data and combine it with use frequency so that you would say, like, perception based?
Absolutely.
You would then have this percentage poor or this percentage, because I could see if James Street were in really bad shape,
Right.
a lot of people would think the whole city is falling apart.
And that's a lot of what we've talked about too, is that the way in which the road is used matters. So is it a major thoroughfare through the city as opposed to, a residential street that gets a lot less traffic? So that will factor in, I think, to how we decide where to reconstruct roads. And having this information, I think, helps us to make that decision. But I mean, yeah, the character of the street, go ahead.
Again, James DiAgostino, SMTC. One thing to keep in mind is that the lower volume roads, residential roads, even when they're in poor shape, they're easier to bring up to a better shape because the kind of treatment necessary usually isn't a complete rehabilitation of that system. Usually you can get away with a cheaper treatment, if you will, as opposed to a high volume road, which when you let it deteriorate too far, requires a complete reconstruction and a much, much more expensive per mile treatment. So it all comes down to how much money do you have, how much federal money do you have access to through us, and what your priorities are. And we can work with you to help you figure that out.
So if you could clarify a little bit. So I'm, just to get more knowledgeable on the subject, I've always known that there's like slurry seal and then like mill and pave. What are the medium repairs? So if we were going to take a fair up to good or a poor up to fair or something like that.
I'll defer to your DPW commissioner to answer those questions.
Would you mind talking about that, Kevin? Just my own personal knowledge. Like, it seems to me, I know that there's I know slurry seal as a quick repair or a fresh coat of paint for the road. And then I know mill and pave, but I don't know what does it look like if we go from a poor to a fair rather than a poor to an excellent?
So Jeremy Robinson, Commissioner of Public Works. I'm going to speak for Kevin. Usually we do some overlays, which is the in-between a full restoration of road and slurry.
So that's like another a layer that you put over the top?
Not just the depth of, 2.5 or 3 inch mill and pave, just a 1.5, 3, yeah.
I mean, was that what East Genesee Street was this year? Ish? Yeah, okay.
So that in between the full recon of the street and a slurry, a top layer, is our overlays.
I mean, and there are a number of other, micro paving. There are a couple other different techniques that we could employ using this information, and we'd be able to evaluate. Because part of the argument with slurry seal or micro paving is that it's not effective. I don't know that we've had a real data-driven way to measure whether it's actually effective. So this will be able to, not based on anecdotes, but based on a third party evaluating a road, see what's effective. I mean, and I think if you see in the maps, a lot of the areas that have consistently good residential roads are the areas that we've just recently slurry sealed.
Did you have one, Sean?
I would just, something that I know we've talked about in the past, but would want to bring it up again because going through the map, a lot of the streets that I think are in poor condition, and obviously that it seems like that's a little bit of a bigger range, but I'm sure once you hit 5, it's pretty bad. So 1 to 5, it doesn't really matter because it's that bad, right? But part of it is when we have these, third parties come in and dig and replace things. We've had, whether it's not usually National Grid themselves, it's usually some sort of third party, like some contractor that they have come in. A number of these roads that are in poor condition are in poor condition and have been complained about because of what a poor job they did. And I think there needs to be probably a bigger conversation about the legislation that we have on the books about what is it, like a third of the street, if they do the damage, then they have to do it. But when they know how to go about breaking it into certain sections, and okay, so this whole section is crap, for lack of a better term, earmuffs, kid.
Well, and that,
but it's really, that's especially like over in my neighborhood, that was a real big issue. They dug it up, they tore it up, they tore up people's sidewalks and just threw gravel in there and said, "All right, you guys are good," and they had to dog them for 3 months to finally get them to fix it. So I think that needs to be, because it's really, we're sort of getting left with the issue and the problem, and then it gets put on DPW to fix problems that other people cause. And it's really not fair to the taxpayers in the city that, while we like having National Grid provide, the services they do, when they have, I'm not going to use the company that it was, but, they really did a terrible job of doing it. And that's why I think a number of these streets, at least in my district, because I can't speak citywide, but in my district, there's streets that they did the damage to, and they're probably in terrible condition as of September this year because of that.
Yeah, and that brings me to the next slide here about next steps. Now that we have this information, what do we do with it? One, I do think that we need to acknowledge the accomplishments that we've made thus far, and all credit goes to Commissioner Robinson and Kevin Hunter for the amount of work that they put in this year and the directions that they gave their staff. Both of them made it clear from the beginning of the construction season that we were going to do everything we could to do all the streets, and have as little carryover as we could from year to year. And as the council knows, that seems to have kind of been the practice where, you get to what you get to, and then you carry over what you carry over. And really, with Kevin Hunter and Commissioner Robinson, they really made that message clear in the beginning. And so I think that certainly accounts for why we were able to, from last year to this year, increase the mile of roads that we paved by 67%. So
money helped, right? We gave
and
$4 million this year, and it was more than it was.
Yes, and with the support of the council, we were able to increase our road paving budget, which made all of that possible. One of the other things that we're doing is we're measuring, pothole responses in our OKRs. So as of this morning, we were at 83%, which means that 83% of the complaints that we receive about potholes we're filling within the time frame that we set, which I think is about 5 days. Now, obviously, that doesn't count the ones that we proactively fill or the ones that we fill in preparation for slurry seal, but at least in terms of ones that we receive via City Line or online or via complaint, we're filling those 83% of the time, which, the response varies by what process we're in terms of road reconstruction, but I'm pretty proud of that statistic. It can always improve, though. Next step also is engaging the public. Like I alluded to before, the process, I think, inadvertently might have seemed secretive to folks, and with our ability to plan further ahead, we can share our plans sooner with residents, with businesses, with our partner agencies, with utilities, and really establish a broad outreach and communication plan with residents so that they don't feel like this all happens in a black box, that it's something that they can engage in, they can give us their feedback, and they know how their dollars are being spent. And there are other measures, obviously, to evaluate. So curbing has been one that's been brought up. We primarily use granite curbing, which is great for our climate. It stands up against snowplows. It's very durable. It's also very expensive, and a significant portion of our road reconstruction budget goes towards curbing. And so we have agreed, as we begin to look towards the next reconstruction season, reconsidering whether or not the curbing either doesn't need to be replaced, can it be replaced with something that's less expensive than granite, understanding that there's a trade-off there, that it might not be as durable. So if it gets hit by a plow, it's going to chip a lot easier if it's concrete as opposed to granite, but that's a conversation.
How are we going to determine that? There are certain neighborhoods where 90% of it's curbed and it's granite, and then are we going to then start changing out sections to be, concrete? Yeah. I mean, is that, and then, one street is just concrete and the rest of it's still granite?
I mean, I think we're going to have to put it onto the streets in order to see if it works. And so, I mean, it might, if it ends up not working and we need to replace it with granite, that's always an option. I mean, there are places where we replace granite without having to redo the entire street. Obviously, it makes sense to do it all at once, but we, talking to other municipalities obviously have to be similar to our climate to see, I don't believe that everybody uses granite. And so it might be that when we do projects, we'll either take a harder look on whether the curb actually really needs to be replaced, or can we use a different material.
Okay, and then along with that, if we use the concrete, would they then be assessed, or it's just still their assessment for the curbing?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes, I mean, to my knowledge, it all comes out of the road reconstruction budget. And so, it's just part of the, if you already lived on an improved street, it's already part of your tax bill. It's not a separate.
No, I understand that, but I'm confident I will get complaints from people that, how come the street over has granite and we have concrete, but we're still paying the same amount.
Well, I mean, I think, well,
I'm just getting ready for the phone
yeah,
calls
yeah,
that
yeah.
And I think what we need to decide as a city, I mean, so right now we're not repaving the amount of roads we need to keep up with how much they're deteriorating, right? So we're losing every year. So we can either sit back and say, we're going to keep our great curbs, but also our roads are going to be undrivable in the next 20 years, or we need to take a hard look at it. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all that people are going to be upset if they have a less fancy curb than someone else, but we got to take a hard look at what
I'm
makes
just
sense.
asking the questions
No,
that I
no,
know I'm gonna
it's-
get calls about after.
No,
this.
it's absolutely valid, and we do anticipate some pushback there. But if I feel confident that if we're able to say, we can now pave double the amount of roads, or
No, and look, and I get that, and I appreciate it, because
Yeah.
when I first got on, with all due respect to the previous administration, year after year after year, that budget was cut for road reconstruction.
Yes.
And that's why I think we are sort of stuck with having this conversation. So I get it, and I appreciate it, and I know we need to look at each avenue. I'm just simply throwing out
No.
questions that I'm confident after everybody sees the news tonight and reads it in the newspaper.
Yeah.
These are the phone calls I'm going to get.
yeah.
as a
I mean,
district.
it sounds like a great idea until it's your street.
I want curbing.
Yes.
I want my curbing fixed, and there are plenty of streets on here that I know I get phone calls about, and they're going to be like, well, how come 2 streets over they have granite and I'm got concrete, but we're still paying the same?
Right. It's a balancing act that we're going to have to strike, but I'm hoping that we have a clear decision process that we go through when we decide what curbing we're going to replace or whether we're going to keep it, so that we at least, it's not, when we're not able to provide an answer, then, conspiracy theories, or is it because you don't like me, or I complained once about my blue bin not being picked up and now you've decided not to install granite curbing on my street. We want to have an informed reason as to why we're doing that, so we can share that with the public, and they can certainly, not be happy with the outcome, but at least there's an explanation behind it.
And just to piggyback on that, one important part is that the standards do change over time. So there are still improved streets that have Medina sandstone curbs around town. The old sort of earth tone curbs that wear away year after year after year, and there might only be an inch left, but technically that's still an improved street. So the standards do change over time. We obviously don't put down sandstone curbs anymore because we've learned our lesson. But that's just another important point to bring up, is that the standards are what they are, but we adjust them over time.
Yeah.
Could I ask a couple about, so one, you'd mentioned that our breakdown, the 50% in good to excellent condition, and the rest of that was consistent with the county and the state average. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And that's, you said slightly off the state average, so that includes like compare and contrast with like a Rochester or a Buffalo.
So we haven't compared and contrasted with Rochester or Buffalo. We're probably better than Rochester. I'm just saying that now.
In all ways.
Well, of course we are. Syracuse is great.
We can look into that. I don't know if their cities are rated in the same manner. I'm sure that their MPO does a bridge and pavement
Do they?
guide each year. They're mandated to, but that may only be for the federal aid eligible roads and not all the roads in the city. But if it's out there, we'll look for it and we'll share it.
And my other question was, when you were talking about the distinction between granite and concrete, you mentioned that it would only be relevant to other municipalities that had similar climates. Are Rochester, Buffalo, Albany doing concrete curbing, and how does that go?
So
No?
the short
if
answer
you don't
is
know.
yes. The long answer is it depends. So depending on the type of road, the volume, who's doing the work, who owns that street. If you take a look at the recently reconstructed Teal Ave interchange by New York State DOT, that has concrete curbing. So
Okay.
it's being used. I grew up on a street that had some concrete curbing on it here in the city. It's not something we've done often, but other municipalities have done it, especially in small areas. So things like ADA corners, those tend to stay granite, where mid-block you might see some concrete for driveways and things like that.
And could you, for my own personal interest, what is the cost differentiation between, say, a foot of granite or a foot of concrete, or I don't know, or a length? Does anybody know? Ballpark? It doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be exact numbers, but are we talking about it's twice as expensive, 3 times, 4 times?
I would say 3 times much expensive than the actual. Am I saying wrong? I mean,
Kevin never goes on the record.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of these numbers that we did this year, you look at some of these streets that we did. Some of these streets, it's 50% curbs that we're spending on. We're spending granite curbs. 50% of the mill and
The
pavement
budget is on curbing.
It's on curb.
And granite
and
curbing.
sometimes it's 3 times as much. Some of these streets is 3 times as much. So it's expensive. So
Yeah.
to your point, we get the calls too for curbs, but we get a lot more calls on roads than we do curbs.
Yeah.
So I mean, for those people, 5 or 10 people that's going to complain about curbs, they're going to also say,
Yeah.
my street is well paved. So
Right.
The labor would be one of the biggest expenses regardless of granite or concrete though, right? So it'd be like if you're installing a new countertop and you choose marble over granite over right? No, am I wrong?
Yes, Kevin Hunter, D.P.W. It's going to be the same process of putting granite in or concrete. You still have to dig, pour. You're just putting concrete in
So
instead
if you
of.
say it's triple the cost granite compared to concrete. That's the cost of the scope of work is probably.
I'm not sure if it's triple the cost, but I can find out. I'm sure it's cheaper than
But it's
than granite. I'm
the
sure it's much
material,
cheaper.
what drives the cost of the material. The labor is going to be the same no matter what you're laying.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if we could get a cost breakdown
Yeah.
of that at some point, just to know in general what the cost differentiation is between the granite and the concrete.
Yeah, and I'm sure it changes every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could get kind of a ballpark.
A ballpark.
But I
for
can-
current-
I can
for
do that.
current
I know
would
we
be
have
great.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
can get it.
that's a good segue. So part of things, do you have another slide?
I just wanted to finish really quickly. External partners. So we've talked about perhaps looking at some of the county's contracts, some of the companies that they work with for paving, and this is not, for the folks in the back, this is not a threat to any jobs at DPW. There is more than enough work to do in street repair. So this does not impact any jobs at DPW. We have more than enough work to do. But could we increase our productivity by bringing on some external partners, other companies that can pave, and rather, Kevin has one milling crew and one paving crew. If we had 4 crews working at once, could we get more done in a shorter period of time? Exploring broader slurry seal application, which Neil kind of alluded to, whether or not we expand the use of slurry seal to try and maintain the condition of our roads, since it's a less expensive, faster option than milling and paving. We've talked in the last year about centralizing road repair under DPW. Obviously, water now, cuts into the roads and they make their own repairs. If we centralize road repair under DPW, then, DPW would ultimately be responsible for the condition of the roads. And then also, to Councilor Carney's point, enhancing our road cut ordinance. So we have a pilot in place right now. The engineering worked with Syracuse University on a different way in which to measure, what needs to be replaced when you cut into the roads. And so we're waiting just to see how that survives the winter, but we do anticipate bringing forth an enhanced, amending the current ordinance about road cuts. And now I'm done.
Okay, so part of what we talked about, Corey, is looking at some of our current practices, doing the analysis to figure out whether or not what we're doing is the most efficient way or whether or not we should do something different. So I just want to kind of check in on that process to see how our analysis is going and when the timeline would be of a decision point. So I'll just highlight a couple of them. So the maintenance, so slurry seal, crack filling of improved streets. Mm-hmm. How is that analysis going, and when's a reasonable timeline to say, okay, we made a decision, we like what we're doing now, or we're going to change it?
Yeah, so I think I would anticipate, now that we have the road rating so that we'll be able to evaluate whether or not micropaving or crack sealing is effective, I think we would be making the decisions about how to do that in the same time that we're doing the entire road recon conversation. So my guess would be, by January, February, we should know what the plan is. It won't be the final draft of the plan, but at least the initial plan. And then, whether or not, if we do the work in the construction season, then we'd likely need another year to see how it survives the winter. So it wouldn't be the next road rating. It would probably be the one after that to see how it survived the winter. But the decision of what we're going to do needs to be made by January, February.
Okay.
I think we're completely open to utilizing those processes, and the I-team, as you know, has done a lot of research on other municipalities that do this.
Okay. Similarly, concrete granite curbing. So when is that?
So I think it's on the same kind of timeline. Once we decide which streets we're going to be selecting, then we look at those streets and say, what's the condition of the curb there? Does it need to be replaced? If it does it make sense to use concrete as opposed to granite, or do we just leave it?
I guess is there, rather than a case-by-case basis, like as a policy of the city, are we saying, in general, on these types of streets we're going to use concrete, on these types of streets we're going to use granite, therefore we're not doing it on a case-by-case basis?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't necessarily case-by-case, but, do we come up with a policy so that on principal arterials we use granite curbing because that's, those are likely to get the most traffic, whereas on residential streets that fit this type of criteria, we're going to use concrete curbing. So I don't want to evaluate on a case by case, and I don't know, just roll the dice and see if you get it. I want to have a policy in place. We just need to select our roads, and then I think a policy comes from there as we go through this process.
I think my biggest fear for both of these, I guess, would be absent some decision point, we get into the next year and we're like, let's just do what we've always done. And absent some time period where someone's coming to us and saying, we actually did the math and it turns out granite is cheaper and this is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. I worry that without that date where we're making that decision, we would kick the can down the road. So
I can tell you there are some construction projects that are being planned right now where we're talking about using concrete curbing instead of granite. So, the engineering department is looking over a number of big projects, and they pose the question, should we be looking in pricing out concrete curbing and see if we can use that in this? Not necessarily concrete. I don't want to make it seem like it's granite versus concrete. There are a number of materials that you can use other than granite, but that process is happening. They are planning on putting out the design, the project to be designed with different curbs. So I understand the fear that we're just going to, by default, let's just select the roads this year and then just default on whether or not we make a decision on curbing till next year. I don't know how to guarantee you that that's not going to happen, but I can tell you I don't want that to happen. And I don't see any reason why that would happen. If we're putting all this time into selecting our roads more carefully, making sure we're stretching dollars as far as we can, granite curbing is the low-hanging fruit.
Right. Yeah, I guess what I can envision is for both of these items, a scenario where you're able to gather data, from within the city, but also other cities that have done slurry seal and other granite curbing, and being able to present it to the public and say, here's the analysis, here's the quantitative data we were able to find, and that's how we led this decision.
And I think, maybe a deadline for that is we will be having public meetings in the beginning of next year to engage with the public on the new way that we're doing road reconstruction. So letting them know the roads that we're going to be doing, and part of that conversation should include, and we're not going to be doing, here's the decision that we've made on curbing. So now you know the city's policy related to curbing with road reconstruction. So as much as that's a deadline that we need to meet, because we are going to have these public meetings, it would make sense to include that and have the decision made by then, so that we can really engage the public fully, not just here's a list of the roads, thanks for coming.
Okay. And then similar, in terms of having external partners.
Yes.
That's another one that seems simple enough to quantify in terms of how much miles per dollar are you getting here versus how much we're getting here, and then what additional roads can we do. So I guess walk me through the analysis of that and how we're going to decide to do that.
So we're actually doing a pilot this season where we are working with the company is Rosselli that has a county contract, and there is a road that we intended to pave that we have that Rosselli has agreed to. We went through the whole process. They've agreed to pave it. They provided us a quote. We're going to compare when they do this road, how close to the quote did they get? Is it really, as cost effective as they say, compared to what we intended to spend in order to do that? And we also need to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. And I know that's been one of D.P.W's concerns, is that, we just need to make sure that the service that Rosselli is offering, or any external partner that we work with, is comparable, so that we're not making an unfair comparison. But I think once we have that job completed by the end of this season, we'll be able to compare, at least initially. They put down, I mean, they have in their county contract a price, right? And so how close to that price were they able to get to? And let's apply that formula to a number of other streets that we know need to be paved and see whether it's a better value to have them do it than, and have us focus on all the other things that street repair needs to focus on. So by that, you know, so that work will happen this season. Starting this week, next week? This week. Yeah, this week. There was a delay because there was some, the county was doing work on the road.
So then the last piece is the like the qualitative rating of the roads. So this is really helpful to be able to visualize what roads and where they stand. But I still think if you're a citizen and your street is on here in one of the reds and your street doesn't get paved, it would be hard to like, how are we determining amongst these ratings what we're deciding to do? And I think that's the piece that I still struggle to try to explain to someone, is the how we're going to take this data and then prioritize which streets we're going to do.
And to be honest, you know, I don't think we have an answer right now. I think these are the conversations, and I think it would be great if you want to be part of the conversations with SMTC to determine this. I mean, it's, you know, I think there wasn't a lot, but there was, you know, some pushback from folks when we rolled out the sidewalk snow ratings to say, look, I see a lot of people walking up and down my street. Why isn't my street on this list? And it's like, because we looked at the data and this is what the data tells us. And so that's not to say you don't have a lot of people walking on your street, but we evaluated it given these factors. And given these factors, this one is just a higher priority in terms of pedestrian safety. So I think we need to have a transparent process where to the public we say, look, we look at this factor, and this, and that's how we determine. So that's not to say your street's not ever going to get paved, but for right now, these are the prioritized streets.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be this exact thing, but it's something similar to like a letter grading where if you're like a small neighborhood arterial, you're a C, but if you're James Street, you're an A or something like that. So then that could also work for the curbing too, whereas if you're on a major street, you know, maybe you're getting granite curbing, but if you're on a dead-end residential street with 3 houses, you wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And then that would help people understand, like, okay, yeah, my street is red and it's rated poorly, but it's the lower tier right. Versus. So I understand why they did.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay.
Washington C Street instead of it. Yeah.
I got one. Sorry, I got a couple comments, questions.
Okay.
So one on the comment about the data combined with the quality of road combined with the traffic use. How realistic is that now? Is that something you could like leave and kind of put together because we have it, or is that something that's a longer term development?
So we have data. It's publicly available on what a road is classified as. It's functional classification. So if it's principal arterial, it's, you know, top of the list like a James Street or like a South Geddes. All of that we already have. We also have traffic counts that are done every year on a rotating basis. Again, coordinated with SMTC and some other factors here where, you know, you see the tubes in the street and you drive over them. Those aren't really counting your speed usually, but they're counting cars. So we get that data coming in pretty regularly. We can layer all these things together, both with the help of our MPO and also with our techno wizards in the I-team.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask all of them and then get him out of here.
Okay.
He's
All
like
right.
the fireworks before he goes to sleep. But I would like to see that sooner than later because I think it wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
We're redoing our website. So what kind of priority is like this traffic communication in the rebuild of the website? Mm-hmm. I don't really, yeah. Bump outs, I think we should be doing bump outs. So to the extent we're doing this like prioritization based on quality and use, I would say combine it with traffic and pedestrians. For instance, like my gut is that every 100 block in Eastwood along James Street should have a bump out. Mm-hmm. And I think data would support that. Mm-hmm. But I'd be interested, like to the extent, we don't really do many bump outs, but how do we use the data to figure out where to do bump outs? That would be good. I was also wondering, given the 1,500 images, if there's a way, I know that the engineering department has like a rule book for what the road width should be. And I know a lot of roads have had creep. So is there a way to like have an app that looks at the photo that measures the actual width and combine it to what it should be so that we could flag roads that have creeped the biggest for like this road shrinking, so to speak.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Counselor. Want to speak to any of those bump outs?
Sure. So the bump outs, great idea. Combining any way we can combine our existing efforts with sort of our goals that we've given ourselves here in the city about being more walkable, being safe, promoting pedestrian uses, bikeability, all those things. Having a consistent way of moving forward with our recon and our slurry process allows us to do that. And I'm going to pass it off to Jim because he has his hand up. And then I'll come back.
A dumb question real quick.
Come on down.
It's like that weird little apron thing that comes off the curbing.
So a bump out would be where you extend the corner, yes. So you're tightening up the corner radii. You sort of have to turn a little bit slower. You'll see them down here on Water Street where the parking's next to the curb, but at the corner, the curb sort of jumps out and you have less room to cross the street.
Okay.
James D'Agostino, SMTC. I just wanted to,
You can move it down.
sorry,
No, that's okay.
I'm a short Italian. One thing I wanted to respond to is the councilman's comment about traffic volumes. We do not collect traffic volumes on low-volume residential streets, period.
Right.
They don't exist.
Yeah.
So I can't compare one low-volume residential street to another low-volume residential street. I have no idea how many cars going on. All we know is that they're low volume. And at that level, it generally doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, okay. I think in terms of the website, I would see that, this would become I can't speak entirely to it, but.
On that point, for
Oh, go
the
ahead.
volume, like if you have James Street, does the volume change at different points? Because then you could sort of estimate that a lot of people are turning onto the side streets. So like the volume of James Street at Oak is different than the volume at Midler, which is different than by the time you reach East Syracuse. So
Yeah, so where the volumes are collected is static, and so it's done in a multi-year process. So we see the trends. Is it going up? Is it going down? And on a corridor like James, it's collected in multiple different areas and not just, say, on the block just east of downtown. And we say, hey, we've got volumes for all of James Street, including in the village. It's definitely not like that.
So just, again, in relation to the curbing and the granite, I know it's my understanding that we, in situations where we can, will reuse granite curbing when doing a road. With the changing of, if we change over to, are we still going to practice doing that, like reusing? If it's in fine condition, we're not going to just take it out and
Yeah,
replace
no.
it. We're going to keep reusing what we can, or if it's one section or two that got hit, it's crumbled, we'll just replace it, or are we going to tear out the whole thing and keep a stockpile of concrete?
No, I think we would,
granted,
I think we would reuse what's able to be reused. I think
So
that's.
Kevin did his kitchen, right?
Yeah, it goes in sections. We can replace it in
Yeah,
sections.
okay.
Yeah.
And then, just, what are we
Sorry,
looking
I
at?
have a question on that. How often are we reusing it? Is that, I've seen some roads where it's all replaced, and I'm curious, is it common for us to reuse it, or are we often just replacing all of it?
So I can't
that's
speak
a-
to all of it, but there are a number of different reasons why a curb might fail, and I think Kevin's about to give us a lesson on why.
We do a lot of reset. So if we can, majority of the time when we replace the curbs, it's going to be sandstone. So we'll have brand new curbs. The curb that we can reuse, reset, make it look straight again, bring it up higher if we have to, if it's sank. So we use what we think we still can, instead of wasting, put it that way. When we have a stockpile in case something happens on a different street, so we have a little bit of a stockpile at the yard for that.
Because, to me, one of the biggest arguments in favor of granite is that it's got a longer lifespan than concrete does. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at a road where you're replacing it anyway when the road fails, and if the road's useful life is shorter than the granite curb, the fact that there's a longer lifespan is irrelevant. And I'm just curious
Yeah.
the numbers on that. But.
I don't think we have set numbers on exactly how long we expect a piece of granite to last. It depends on where it is. how many times it gets struck, but I mean, granite is extremely durable. We know that. Concrete is fairly durable as well. It's just, we're talking about one lasts for thousands of years and the other might only last for 50. So,
Yeah, I mean, I worry about, oh geez,
Other materials for curbing?
our concrete curbing, sorry, is our salt. Salt will eat away concrete quicker than, as soon as our plows chip it away, salt eats it away. And we'll, our next, upcoming winters, we keep on hitting it. Now we're going to, where you can just go back to the yard and get a piece of concrete and reset it. Now you're going to have to, it's a process. Yeah. But I think it's something to look at because
to Neil's point earlier, there are some concrete curbs in the city, which seems to be a good laboratory for how bad salt is on it,
Yeah.
So Kevin, while you're up there,
Yeah.
I like to, when I get new data on things, I like to always sort of take a close view of them. I'm sure you've looked at this, or you will look at this. And what's your gut feeling having looked at it? Does it compare with, where you say, oh, they say this is a good street. This isn't a good street. I know this. Or this looks like bad. And does it match up with what you know and what you're, is it accurate? And it may be because, as being said, they're taking these readings as they move along, but how does it match up? And I know you haven't looked at this as probably as
I honestly haven't looked at it.
Please do, and
I will.
just get your gut and look at it and say, okay, is it consistent with what I know? Is it accurate? If it's not, then let's find out why. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all. That's my first thing. And second one is, Commissioner, how much of that $4 million budget do we use on the roads this year? I know we got till the end of June. But.
Yeah, so to answer your question, Counselor, this year we set out to do, 20 roads. Some of our carryovers. We ended up doing 18 out of them. 2 of the roads we couldn't do because of various reasons with the county and or National Grid. So 85% of the budget is already spent. We got about roughly $958,000. On one road at 600, which is Mr. Rich's favorite street, which is Grand Ave, hasn't been done. So that's a fairly big project there, and that's the county because of the water drainage issues that we are working with the county on. So we had to hold off on doing that.
I don't know if the spreadsheet you have is the one I'm thinking of, but does it have the breakdown of granite of the curb versus the paving on there? Just for
Yeah. Yes, it does.
How much out of the $4 million is curbing?
For the entire budget, I have to use a calculator.
I didn't know if it's already.
I don't know if it's totaled out there.
No, it's not total, and I would have to do it. But you take one street, like I said to Councilor Driscoll. You take one street, it's 58% of the budget. We spend a $600,000 road. 58% of it is curbing. That's tough to swallow. Especially when you can probably do 4 more roads with that $300,000 or $400,000 that we're spending on curbing. So I know that we get complaints on curbing, but we get way more complaints on roads. So
No, and I get that. I guess my concern, and again, I hope we can actually get this, is to find out how many other municipalities are actually doing it and how long the lifespan really is for the concrete versus the granite. I mean, look, of course, granite's going to have a longer lifespan.
Right.
exactly.
But does it coincide with like the roads? So we're going saying, okay, we got to go through and tear up these roads and fix these roads, and we need to do the curbing, so it's sort of they're together at one time, as opposed to, okay, the road's fine, but now we got to tear up go and reset and do the curbing, because it's like sidewalking. You can't just pop a block in. You gotta.
So I task you this: if you travel in your time, travel to different cities like Chicago or some of the cities, you look at their infrastructures there. They're same climate, same pretty much a bigger city, but you look at their special downtown district. It's all granite, and their neighborhoods are mostly concrete, and they got the same exact climate that we do. So we're looking at that and using that data to say, why can't we, employ that in Syracuse? Right?
Yeah, and again, this is sort of a dumb question, I think, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But what is the concrete curbing going to actually look like? Is it going to be like just the same idea where it's just?
Have you been on Till?
We're going to have.
Like I know the state done.
If we're going to go through and do these in, neighborhoods on roads and things like that, is it like if you go into certain suburbs that have concrete curbing like that now, they've got almost I don't know what to call it. I don't want to call it an apron, but a little bit of an apron. There's part of it that comes off into the road. Are we going to have that same sort of look, or are we just going to try and keep it consistent where it's, concrete just along the side? And
I defer to Kevin, but I would assume that we were.
I would assume we would want it to look like granite, the height, the width. We have concrete or concrete curbing up on Euclid at Nightingham by Euclid and Kimber.
Okay.
If you go up there, when we put that in years ago, it's very high and it's wide, but it was done for a purpose for people not to park on for events up there, for the sport events, because there was a lot of parking and things going on up there. So that wouldn't be. I don't think we'd use that type of that shape. I guess that form.
Yeah.
So I think we would go with just a regular granite curbing shape and form for. It would just look like concrete.
try and keep it looking, because that's sort of.
And it doesn't look bad. It really doesn't.
No, and I guess that was a little bit of my concern. If we're going to go and replace it, is it going to be consistent with what we already have in place? Because there's nothing worse. I mean, with sidewalks now, when we do repairs, there are certain streets like mine where the sidewalk, when it was put in, very narrow, and I've had my sidewalk replaced, a couple other neighbors, but people in between haven't, so it looks
Right.
odd where it's, the 5 foot, and then there's this narrow, 3 foot. And it's, how are we is it gonna marry well or blend
Yeah.
with?
Ideally, it shouldn't stick out that,
Yeah.
that's clearly not a granite curb. I mean, hopefully we'll do our best to.
Yeah, I don't think we would have a 90% granite curb street and have a couple pieces of concrete. That would just.
I just mean where it's once, if there's a street and it's okay, one block is like this, or the block butts up to another street, and then it goes from concrete to, just so we're keeping, consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we're gonna have to talk about.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
One thing to point out about concrete is
Sorry, I just wanted to answer your question.
1.8.
1.8 million out of the 4 is for curbs. Okay, thanks.
When we're looking at concrete curbing, somehow we have turned off on the concrete conversations here. The sky's really the limit for what we want it to look like. It's very easy to work with. Where granite, we only have a couple options. If we want the concrete to have a bevel or look like it's a mountable curb or whatever we want, we can do that.
Any other questions? Counselor? Good?
No, I'm all
Counselor?
set. Yeah, my question's been answered. Thank
Anything
you.
else?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.